Yes, it is, and welcome back. Wednesday, March 16th, 2022, coming to you live from the Guns Etc. studios. I am Seth Liebson. A bit of a confession, and maybe the prejudice or distaste comes from my professions and hobbies as a communicator or writer, but I've never understood why the human being, as a character, an entity of reason, who relies on reason, who is distinguished from other forms of animal life as possessing reason and speech, I've never understood why pictures impact humans more than appeals to reason and rhetoric in its or their best sense and senses. Aristotle, the first political scientist, tells us in his first chapter of his book on politics that this is the distinguishing difference between humans and other life forms, reason and speech, that leads humans to alone have any sense of good and evil, or just and unjust and the like. And the association of living beings who have this sense of reason and speech then makes a family and a state. We've spoken about that importance before, but it is speech, the word used in an appeal to reason or rational thought, that Aristotle tells us how to distinguish the expedient and the inexpedient, and therefore likewise the just and the unjust. I was thinking about all this given the gallons of ink spilt and spent documenting the horror of what is taking place in Ukraine, and how in his speech to Congress today, Volodymyr Zelensky showed a video that had, evidently based on my calls and correspondences, changed a lot of minds. Is it that we have less trust in words than images? Then General Dwight Eisenhower and General George Patton ordered pictures be taken at the Ohrdruf-Buchenwald concentration camp when they liberated it in 1945, as they were concerned too many in the world or in history would not believe what they saw, including, as Eisenhower put it, man's inhumanity and cruelty to man on a scale never before imagined. He said he wanted photographs so that someday nobody could deny what he saw as, his words, propaganda. The idea that a picture is worth 1,000 words has been with us a long time, since the early part of the last century, and it was created, the phrase, as we have come to know it, was created by an advertising corporation executive to better sell things. It was and of a commercial origin. And still yet we can think of ads where really the words or wording were better than the pictures. But something about a picture moves we humans more than words do. And this would also explain why autocrats try to ban media in war zones, or why the Biden administration banned the Fox News drones that were showing the problems and crises at our southern border a few months back. Those videos did exist, of course, for a time before the ban, and yet did they move anyone or any policy? Kamala Harris famously told Lester Holt last year when he asked her why she hadn't visited our border, she said, "And I haven't been to Europe either, so what?" Well, she's been to Europe now a few times, saying stupid things like Ukraine is a NATO member, which the White House has scrubbed from the officially released transcript of her remarks. But the imagery that is moving people in regard to Russia's atrocities and violation of the border of Ukraine did not so move anyone here about the violation of our border and sovereignty and safety, or that of the victims of exploitation and trafficking. Yes, of course, these things are not the same imagery by legions of enormity, but it is curious what moves and tugs the heartstrings. Over 100,000 drug overdose deaths, the majority from drugs coming across our border, moves less than the atrocities in Ukraine. In his book, The Image, the great historian Daniel Boorstin writes, quote, "The making of illusions which flood our experiences has become the business of America, some of its most honest and most necessary and most respectable business." He goes on to write, and this was all the way back in the 1960s, he goes on to write, quote, "What ails us most is not what we have done with Americans, but what we have substituted for America. We suffer primarily not from our vices or our weaknesses, but from our illusions. We are haunted not by reality, but by those images we have put up in place of reality," close quote. Now, bear with here, because this is the root of the root and the bud of the bud. Dr. Boorstin puts it this way, quote, "The disproportion between what an informed citizen needs to know and what he can know is ever greater. The disproportion grows with the increase of the officials' powers of concealment and contrivance. The news gatherers need to select, invent, and plan correspondingly increases. Close quote. So we are ever increasingly governed by what the media wants us to be moved by. What it decides or conceals or contrives should be important to us. Tyrants may want to ban media to conceal war crimes, but what of purported non-tyrants that want to ban media to conceal facts that might otherwise demand judgments and solutions? The process of alteration was not confined to only newspapers, but to all kinds of documentary evidence and film throughout history, and certainly George Orwell writes about that in 1984, usually at the behest of the party, capital P, party. Now, my guess, and it's only a guess, is Joe Biden and the administration did not want Zelensky's film shown today, as it has unveiled a truth of the enormity of violence unleashed on Ukraine civilians that President Biden seems unable to do anything about except elevate and accelerate his condemnations of Russia. He gave a small speech today, Biden did, and took no questions, coldly. So really one of the few differences between the sovereignty of Ukraine and the United States to this president is that the vice president will be dispatched to the former and not the latter, and the president's rhetoric will also be on behalf of the former and not the latter. Yes, again, I know, it's not the same thing. It doesn't have the same geopolitical consequences, and it isn't the same level of volume or violence. But there is no shortage of that here, and the oath to uphold the Constitution is to preserve and defend and protect us, not people in other countries. Yes, moral obligations attach to the morally and militarily powerful. We cannot engage in plural ignorance or Kitty Genovese ethics. But shouldn't that attach first here, then elsewhere? Leo Tolstoy, if I can quote him, says everyone wants to change the world, nobody wants to change himself. And that should be considered in an extrapolated sense. How do you try to change the world by showing more concern about others' borders and lives without doing the far easier and nearer thing about changing your own people's country and policies? I'm not counseling inaction or no action in defending Ukraine or any ally or stopping inhumane depredations or civilization abuse. But I do often wonder what the mood of this country would be about institutions and organizations like Nike or Colin Kaepernick and other so-called American corporations and the NBA. I wonder what it would be if we had video images out of Xinjiang province, China, where what is taking place in real time right now comes as close to what Dwight Eisenhower saw in 1945 as anything the world has seen since then. Here's just a little about what the New York Times reported from there 2 years ago. Quote, the students booked their tickets home at the end of the semester, hoping for a relaxing break after exams and a summer of happy reunions with family in China's far west. Instead, they would soon be told that their parents were gone, relatives had vanished, and neighbors were missing, all of them locked up in an expanding network of detention camps built to hold Muslim ethnic minorities. Children saw their parents taken away. Students wondered who would pay their tuition, and crops could not be planted or harvested for lack of manpower, the report notes. Yet officials were directed to tell people who complained to be grateful for the Communist Party's help and to remain quiet, close quote. I could go on. Lest anyone be tempted, though, to follow the stupid line that we care about Ukraine because they are white, let me tell you that's absurd. Did we care about the Somalis and lose Americans on their behalf because they were white? Or twice going to war against Iraq because Saddam's victims in Kuwait and in his own country were white? How about in Afghanistan? We went there because they were white? Nonsense. We dismiss the concerns about China for two reasons. A, it is a communist power, and there was a lot of sympathy for that movement. Look at how insouciant this country is when it learns of such communist organizations here in America as exist under our noses at most of our universities. But really, more importantly, it's B, because it would counter the narrative that virtue-signaling corporations and entities from the NBA to Nike to Colin Kaepernick's anti-racist campaign are all financed and dependent on covering up China's abuse of racism and civilization, of race and civilization. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, even when the food is scrubbed and sanitized once it comes from the toxic tree of inhumanity. So what will be done about Russia and Ukraine right now? Now that the evidence of words and reportage has been complemented by that which should propel its urgency 1,000-fold with video pictures, I obviously don't know. But that is not the problem. The problem is our president does not know. As I've said again and again, he'd better watch his rhetoric because as he increasingly ramps it up, he increasingly sets up expectations. The expectations are high now, maybe at their height, and the president listeth toward incomprehension and inaction. After having raised the rhetoric to the height it is now, having set the expectations he cannot meet and cannot justify as to why he can or cannot meet them. What we have, it is sad to say, is a country better than its leadership. And if I may take a page from the liberal world order advocates, what we have now, too, it is sad to say, is a people in other parts of the world that is better than this country's leadership. That is a frightening conclusion, or it should be. Shakespeare put it that some people are born great, some people achieve greatness, and some people have greatness thrust upon them. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were not born leaders. They do not seem to be on their way to achieving a record of great leadership. But the times demand, as the evidence here and abroad demands, that America be America. And for that to happen, America requires leadership. The world is a dangerous place, Daniel Patrick Moynihan famously remarked once. You bet it is. And so too is America. Our enemies know this, of course. I don't know if our leadership does.